Dear viewers, what would you do if the most dangerous man in the city decided you belong to him? Not because he loves you, but because he can't stand the thought of anyone else touching you. Today's story is about Evangeline Suki, a young black woman working as a server in Seoul, whose entire world changed the moment she accidentally spilled wine on the wrong person. This isn't just another story about a wealthy man saving a damsel in distress. This is about one impulsive claim that trapped two people in a dance between protection and possession, between safety and suffocation. Before we dive deep into this intense journey, I want you to know that what you're about to hear will challenge how you think about control, consent, and the dangerous line between protecting someone and owning them. If stories like this move you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end because this story has twists you won't see coming, including the moment when the woman everyone thought needed saving becomes the one doing the rescuing. Let's begin with Evangeline Suki, a 24-year-old immigrant who had learned to survive by becoming invisible. But on this particular night, visibility would become unavoidable, and the consequences would change two lives forever. Evangeline Suki had perfected the art of becoming invisible. At 24 years old, she moved through the gleaming corridors of Lumiere restaurant like a shadow, her blue and white uniform crisp and spotless, her smile professionally pleasant, her eyes carefully downcast. In Seoul's most exclusive dining establishment, invisibility wasn't just a survival strategy, it was a requirement. She'd arrived in South Korea 3 years ago with a culinary degree from a small college back home and dreams that felt almost embarrassing in their ambition. Her own restaurant, her own menu, a place where Ethiopian spices would dance with Korean flavors, where her mother's recipes would find new life, where she could finally prove that she was more than just another foreign worker grateful for whatever scraps the world threw her way. But dreams required money, and money required endurance. "Evangeline, table 7 needs water," manager Kim called out, his tone sharp with the casual dismissiveness she'd learned to expect. He never used that tone with the Korean servers. She'd noticed. She always noticed. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice smooth and accommodating, betraying none of the exhaustion that had settled into her bones like an old friend. 16-hour shifts, feet that screamed with every step, hands raw from carrying scalding plates, tips that were always smaller than her colleagues received, as if her dark skin somehow made her service less valuable. The discrimination came in small doses, easy to ignore individually but collectively suffocating. The customers who refused to let her serve them, the kitchen staff who, accidentally, gave her the heaviest trays, the way her suggestions were dismissed in staff meetings, only to be praised when a Korean server repeated them minutes later. Smile, accommodate, endure. That was Evangeline's trinity of survival. Every slight swallowed, every insult absorbed, every boundary crossed with a polite "thank you," because speaking up meant being replaced, and being replaced meant watching her dreams evaporate like steam from the kitchen. She kept a notebook hidden in her locker, filled with recipes and sketches of what her restaurant would look like someday. Some nights, when the exhaustion threatened to break her, she'd pull it out and remind herself why she endured. Every insult was an investment. Every smile was bringing her closer to the day when she could stand in her own kitchen, her own space, and finally be visible on her own terms. But tonight, as she carried a bottle of expensive wine toward the private dining room where Seoul's elite gathered in their designer suits and casual cruelty, Evangeline had no idea that invisibility was about to become impossible. That one moment of panic, one backward step, one spilled bottle would make her the center of attention in the most dangerous way possible. She'd learned to become invisible. That night, she'd become impossible to ignore. Yang Kai-hoon had stopped feeling things at the age of 12. That was the year he watched his mother bleed out on their apartment floor while her killer walked away unpunished, protected by money and connections Kai-hoon didn't yet possess. He'd knelt in her blood, making promises to her cooling body, and somewhere between her last breath and the sirens that arrived too late, something inside him had simply switched off. 20 years later, at 32, he sat in Lumiere's private dining room like a king surveying his territory. Silver hair caught the chandelier light, making him look almost ethereal despite the tattoos that crawled up his neck and disappeared beneath his perfectly tailored black suit. His men flanked him at the table, 6 loyal soldiers who'd learned long ago that their boss's calm was far more terrifying than other men's rage. Kai-hoon's organization controlled half of Seoul's underground, gambling, protection, information. His empire was built on fear and respect in equal measure, maintained through cold efficiency rather than theatrical violence. He didn't need to raise his voice. When Yang Kai-hoon spoke, people listened, and when he made decisions, they were executed with surgical precision. Tonight was business, as every night was business. Territorial negotiations with a Chinese syndicate looking to expand their operations. Numbers discussed over expensive wine. Boundaries drawn with polite threats wrapped in diplomatic language. Kai-hoon read people the way others read books, identifying weaknesses, calculating advantages, always 3 moves ahead. His reputation preceded him everywhere. The man who never smiled, never shouted, never showed a flicker of emotion even when ordering someone's death. They called him the Ice King behind his back, though never to his face. Some said he had no heart. Others whispered he'd sold it to the devil for power. The truth was simpler and somehow sadder. He'd simply forgotten how to feel. Business dinners, territorial meetings, enforcement actions. Kai-hoon moved through his days with mechanical efficiency, his life a carefully orchestrated routine of control and power. He had everything a man could want: money, influence, fear, respect. Women threw themselves at him regularly, drawn to the danger he represented, but he felt nothing when he touched them. They were transactions, temporary distractions, ultimately forgettable. He'd forgotten what it felt like to want something he couldn't take, forgotten what it meant to be surprised, to feel desire that wasn't calculated, to experience anything beyond the cold satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly. As he lifted his wine glass, listening to the Chinese representative drone on about profit margins, Kai-hoon had no idea that in approximately 40 seconds, a panicked server would stumble backward and drench him in Shadao Margox. That one accidental moment would crack the ice he'd built around himself and awaken something he'd thought dead for 2 decades. Something possessive, something consuming, something that would make him feel everything all at once. Park Yi-sung arrived at 9:47 p.m., trailing expensive cologne and entitlement like a toxic cloud. Evangeline recognized him immediately, a regular customer, mid-50s, real estate mogul with political connections that made him untouchable. The other servers had warned her about him weeks ago in hurried whispers during shift changes. Don't refuse him anything. Don't make eye contact. Just smile and get out. But tonight, Park was drunk, emboldened by the soju flowing at his table, and Evangeline was the server assigned to his section. "You," he called out, his voice thick and demanding. "Come here, beautiful, pour my drink." She approached with her practiced smile, the bottle of premium whiskey steady in her hands despite the way her instincts screamed warnings. As she leaned forward to pour, his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, pulling her closer. His breath reeked of alcohol and something sour. "So exotic," he slurred, his other hand reaching for her waist. "How much would it cost to take you home tonight?" Evangeline's blood turned to ice. "Sir, please let go." "Don't be shy." His grip tightened, fingers digging into her skin. "Girls like you should be grateful for the attention." The dining room felt impossibly hot. Other customers pretended not to notice, suddenly fascinated by their plates. Manager Kim conveniently disappeared into the kitchen. Park's hand slid higher, his face too close to her neck, and pure panic seized Evangeline's chest. She jerked backward, desperate to escape his grip. The wine bottle, Shade Al Margox, she'd later remember, $2,000, flew from her other hand in a perfect arc. Crimson liquid cascaded through the air in slow motion, splashing across the silver-haired man seated at the adjacent table. The man in the black suit. The man whose entire table had gone deathly silent the moment the wine made contact. The restaurant froze. Evangeline's heart stopped as Yang Kai-hoon slowly stood, wine dripping from his hair, his suit, his tattooed hands. His eyes, cold, dark, absolutely lethal, fixed first on the wine staining his clothes, then on Park's hand still gripping her wrist, then on her terrified face. The silence stretched like a blade. Then Kai-hoon moved, each step deliberate, predatory. He stopped inches from Park, his presence a physical force that made the older man's grip falter. "Get your hand," Kai-hoon said, his voice soft as silk and sharp as steel, "off what's mine." Before Evangeline could process the words, she was pulled forward, away from Park and into Kai-hoon's space. His scent hit her, expensive cologne, leather, and something dangerous. His arm wrapped around her waist, possessive and unyielding, pressing her against his wine-soaked suit. Park stumbled backward, his face draining of color. "Young SSI, I didn't know, I apologize." "Leave, one word, absolute." Park practically ran from the restaurant, his humiliation echoing in the silence. Evangeline stood frozen against Kai-hoon's chest, feeling his heartbeat, steady, controlled, terrifyingly calm. His hand remained on her waist, fingers splayed possessively. She looked up at him, confusion and terror warring in her expression. Kai-hoon looked down at her and something flickered in those dead eyes, something that looked almost like surprise. He'd meant it, every word. She was his now. Evangeline tried to leave through the kitchen entrance an hour later, her shift abandoned, her hands still shaking. She made it exactly 12 steps into the back alley before two men in dark suits materialized from the shadows, blocking her path with the casual efficiency of people who did this often. "Miss Suki," the taller one said, his tone polite but immovable, "our boss's car is waiting." I don't need." Her protest died as a black Mercedes pulled up, its windows tinted so dark they looked like portals to another dimension. The door opened. Kai-hoon sat inside, silver hair gleaming in the dim light, his wine-stained suit replaced with a fresh one. He didn't ask, he simply waited, and somehow that was more commanding than any order. The drive to her apartment was suffocating in its silence. Kai-hoon stared out the window, his profile carved from ice, while Evangeline pressed herself against the opposite door, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain he could hear it. When she tried to speak, to ask what was happening, his raised hand silenced her without a word. Her apartment building looked shabbier than usual against the Mercedes' gleaming exterior. Kai-hoon followed her upstairs, his presence filling her tiny studio like smoke, making everything feel smaller, cheaper, more exposed. "You're under my protection now," he said, his first word since the restaurant. He stood in the center of her space, hands in his pockets, examining her life with those calculating eyes. "I didn't ask for this." Evangeline's voice came out stronger than she felt. "I don't need." "You spilled wine on me. Park touched you." Kai-hoon turned to face her fully and his gaze pinned her in place. "The choice was made." "That's not." "Park Yi-sung has connections to city officials, judges, police. He's assaulted dozens of women like you, foreign workers no one will protect." Kai-hoon's voice remained flat, reciting facts. "By tomorrow, he'll have decided whether to destroy your visa status or simply make you disappear. The only reason he won't is because everyone in that restaurant saw me claim you." The word claim hung in the air like a verdict. "I don't understand," Evangeline whispered. Kai-hoon pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. "2 of my men will be stationed outside. You don't leave without them. You don't speak to Park or anyone connected to him. You don't quit your job or change your routine without my permission." He held out a phone, new, expensive. "My number. You call if anything feels wrong. This is insane. You can't just. I can. He moved closer and Evangeline's back hit the wall. His hand came up, fingers gentle as they tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. No one touches you but me. Understand? It wasn't a question. He left and she heard his men take position in the hallway. Evangeline stood in her apartment, cage bars made of protection, realizing she'd traded one prison for another. But that night, for the first time in months, she slept without fear. The days blurred into a suffocating routine. Kai-hoon was everywhere, appearing at the restaurant during her shifts, sitting at table 12 with his men, his eyes tracking her movements across the dining room. Manager Kim suddenly treated her with nervous respect, practically bowing when he assigned her tables. The other servers whispered and kept their distance, as if her new status was contagious. On day 4, Kai-hoon moved her. "Your building isn't safe," he said, already having his men pack her belongings. The new apartment was in his building, 3 floors below his penthouse. Larger, luxurious, completely his domain. Guards stationed at every entrance. Security cameras in the hallways. A gilded cage with marble countertops and a view she could never afford. The suffocation was constant. She couldn't walk to the corner store without 2 silent shadows following. Couldn't meet her few friends without background checks being run. Her phone, the one he'd given her, buzzed with his messages. Eat, sleep, don't push yourself. But groceries appeared in her fridge, always the right brands, always fresh. Her student loans, the ones crushing her dreams, paid in full. The electricity bill she'd been dreading settled. Her uniform, professionally cleaned, hanging in her closet each morning. Evangeline tried to resist. She went out alone one evening, made it 2 blocks before his car pulled up beside her. She refused a designer coat he'd sent. It reappeared the next day with a note. "Winter is coming. Wear it." 2 weeks in, she snapped. "Why are you doing this?" She cornered him in the building's lobby, fury overriding fear. "I'm not your responsibility. I'm not your anything." Kai-hoon stopped, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he just looked at her, and something flickered behind his eyes, confusion, maybe, or recognition of something he couldn't name. "I don't know," he said finally, the admission seeming to cost him. "I just know I can't stop." The honesty shocked her. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." He moved closer and she held her ground. "My mother died because I was too weak to protect her. I was 12. I watched her bleed out while her killer walked away because he had money and I had nothing." His voice remained flat, factual, but his hands clenched. "I swore I'd never be powerless again, never watch someone under my protection suffer." "I'm not under your protection. You just decided I was. The moment Park touched you and I intervened, you became mine to protect. In my world, that's not negotiable." Evangeline stared at him, seeing past the ice for the first time. Not a monster. A broken 12-year-old boy in a powerful man's body, still kneeling in his mother's blood, still trying to save someone he'd lost 20 years ago. "You can't control everything," she said softly. "I can try." Her hand moved before she thought about it, fingers touching his clenched fist. He froze, eyes widening fractionally, the most emotion she'd seen from him. She expected him to pull away. He didn't. Something shifted between them in that moment. Fear didn't disappear, but curiosity crept in beside it. Who was the man beneath the ice? 3 months of forced coexistence created unexpected rhythms. Dinners became routine, Kai-hoon appearing at her door at 8, sitting at her small table while she ate takeout and he nursed whiskey. Morning coffee in the lobby before her shifts, his silent presence somehow companionable. Late nights when neither could sleep, talking in carefully neutral tones about nothing and everything. Evangeline learned his world in fragments. The businesses that were fronts. The violence he orchestrated with phone calls and quiet orders. The impossible choices between loyalty and survival, between protecting his people and eliminating threats. He spoke of it clinically, as if discussing weather patterns, but she learned to read the tension in his shoulders when decisions weighed heavy. Kai-hoon learned hers too. Her childhood in Atlanta, her mother's restaurant that failed, her determination to succeed where her mother couldn't. The culinary school scholarship, the naive hope that Seoul would see her talent before her skin color, dreams she'd stopped saying aloud because they hurt too much to voice. The shift came on a Tuesday evening. Evangeline cooked for him, really cooked, not reheated takeout. Ethiopian Doro Wat, her mother's recipe, spices she'd hoarded from the African market across town. She placed the plate in front of him, suddenly nervous in a way his violence had never made her. Kai-hoon took one bite and his eyes closed. For 5 seconds, his carefully controlled expression cracked completely. Something like pain and pleasure and memory all tangled together crossed his face. "When did you last feel anything?" she asked softly. His eyes opened, finding hers. "The moment you spilled wine on me." The confession hung between them, intimate and dangerous. But the outside world wouldn't let them exist in this strange bubble. Park was making moves, spreading rumors about Evangeline, questioning Kai-hoon's judgment, suggesting weakness. Worse, a rival gang led by Kim Dong-woo saw her exactly as she'd feared, a vulnerability to exploit. Kai-hoon's response was predictable: more guards, tighter restrictions, surveillance that bordered on paranoia. When she tried to visit the African market alone, his men physically blocked her. When she suggested meeting a friend for coffee, he simply said no. "This is insane," Evangeline exploded one evening 3 weeks into the heightened security. "I can't breathe, I can't live like this." "You'll live, that's what matters." His voice remained infuriatingly calm. "No, existing isn't living. I'm not your possession." Kai-hoon stood abruptly, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. "Then why?" His voice dropped to something raw and almost vulnerable. "Do I feel like you possess me?" The air electrified. His hand came up, cupping her face with surprising gentleness. Her breath caught. They stood frozen, inches apart, his thumb tracing her cheekbone, her hand somehow fisted in his shirt. He leaned closer. She didn't pull away. At the last moment, Kai-hoon jerked back, releasing her like she'd burned him. He stared at his own hand as if it had betrayed him, then at her face, and she saw something like fear flash across his features. "This isn't," he started. "No," she agreed, her voice shaking. "It isn't." But they both knew the lie. This stopped being just protection the moment she'd touched his hand in the lobby. Maybe it had never been just protection at all. Park Yi-sung and Kim Dong-woo made their alliance in a basement bar in Itaewon, their shared hatred of Yang Kai-hoon cementing the partnership. Park wanted revenge for his humiliation. Kim wanted Kai-hoon's territory. The foreign girl was the key to both. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Take what Kai-hoon had claimed, draw him out alone, eliminate him and his weakness simultaneously. They struck at 5:47 a.m. when the city was still dark and Evangeline's guards were at their most fatigued. Professional, clinical. 2 men found unconscious in the hallway, necks injected with something that dropped them before they could radio for help. Evangeline woke to a hand over her mouth and the cold press of a gun barrel against her temple. Terror flooded her system, but underneath it, training kicked in. The self-defense Kai-hoon had insisted she learn, the situational awareness he drilled into her during their forced coexistence. Don't fight when you can't win. Observe, wait for the opening. The warehouse smelled of rust and fear. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, Evangeline saw them. 5 other women, all foreign workers, all bound and terrified. Filipino, Vietnamese, Thai. Park's pattern made sickeningly clear. "He really cares about you," Park's voice came from the darkness, slurred with alcohol even this early. The great Yang Kai-hoon, brought low by a black whore. Evangeline said nothing, cataloging exits, counting captors, calculating odds. Kai-hoon's phone buzzed at 6:15 a.m. The video loaded slowly. Evangeline bound to a chair, Park's face inches from hers, his hand stroking her cheek with deliberate obscenity. Her expression was defiant, but Kai-hoon could see the fear underneath. The message was simple: come alone, Pier 7 warehouse, 1 hour or she disappears. Something inside Kai-hoon shattered. The control he'd built for 20 years, the ice that had protected him since his mother's death, it cracked and splintered, leaving him gasping in his penthouse like a drowning man. His hands shook. His vision blurred. The thought of Evangeline hurt, violated, dead because of him. He'd made her a target. By claiming her publicly, by treating her like property, by letting his enemies see how much she mattered. His protection had painted a bullseye on her back. His phone was already in his hand, instinct telling him to go alone, to maintain control, to handle this himself the way he handled everything. But Evangeline's voice echoed in his memory: you can't control everything. His mother had died because he'd been powerless and alone. What if trying to control everything, refusing to trust anyone, was just another form of powerlessness? Kai-hoon made a decision that went against every instinct he'd developed since age 12. He called his entire organization. Pier 7, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos inside. Full mobilization. Park and Kim have Evangeline. We end this tonight. Boss, the message said. I know what it said. Kai-hoon grabbed his jacket, checking his weapon. And I'm trusting that Evangeline is strong enough to survive until we get there. She's not helpless. She never was. I just made the mistake of treating her like she was. He taught her to fight. Now he had to trust that she would. Inside the warehouse, Evangeline forced herself to think like a server. Reading people had kept her employed for 3 years, anticipating needs, recognizing patterns, understanding hierarchy through observation. The guards rotated every 40 minutes. The one by the east door checked his phone obsessively. The leader drank from a flask, his attention wandering. Weaknesses, patterns, opportunities. She caught the eye of the Vietnamese woman closest to her and tilted her head slightly toward the distracted guard. Understanding flickered. Evangeline had spent years communicating across language barriers in restaurant kitchens. Survival had its own universal language. We're not victims, she whispered to the women during a guard change. We're survivors, and survivors fight back. It took 2 hours of careful coordination, loosened bonds during bathroom breaks, a smuggled piece of broken glass. The Vietnamese woman's watch used to track the guard rotation. The Filipino woman's hairpin turned into a lock pick. Skills born from necessity, from lives spent making do with nothing. When Park arrived at noon, drunk and eager, expecting submission and fear, he found 5 freed women armed with rusted pipes, broken bottles, and 3 years of suppressed rage. Evangeline stood at the center, the broken glass gripped in her hand, her server's uniform torn but her spine straight. You thought I needed saving, she said. Park's face contorted with disbelief and fury. You're just a server. She moved before he finished, Kai-hoon's training flowing through muscle memory. Low, fast, targeting weak points. Park stumbled backward, shock replacing his arrogance. I was never just anything. The warehouse erupted. Park's men rushed forward. The women fought with desperate efficiency. Evangeline ducked a punch, drove her elbow into a throat, exactly as Kai-hoon had taught her during those late-night sessions she'd resented. The east door exploded inward. Kai-hoon came through like a force of nature, his men flooding in behind him, and found the battle already turning. His eyes found Evangeline immediately. She had Park on his knees, the broken glass pressed against his throat, her hand steady despite the blood and chaos around her. Every instinct screamed at Kai-hoon to take over, to finish it, to control the situation. He started forward, hand reaching for his gun. But Evangeline's eyes met his across the warehouse. Fierce, capable, asking for trust, not rescue. Kai-hoon stopped, nodded once, Finish it your way. Evangeline looked down at Park, seeing not just her abuser but every man who'd grabbed her, dismissed her, treated her as less than human. The glass pressed harder. One movement and it would be over. Instead, she pulled out the phone she'd stolen from a guard. Smile for the camera, Park SSI, evidence, witnesses, the police you've bribed so well. Justice, not murder. The gang war that followed was brief and brutal. Kim Dong-woo died trying to escape. Park was dragged away by police Kai-hoon had leverage over, his screams echoing off warehouse walls. The other women were freed, given money and protection, witnesses to corruption that would finally see consequences. In the aftermath, surrounded by wreckage and the acrid smell of gunfire, Kai-hoon and Evangeline found each other. No words. Just his arms around her, her face pressed against his chest, both of them shaking with adrenaline and relief and something deeper. She'd saved herself, he'd let her. Everything had changed. The hospital room was sterile and too bright, but Kai-hoon hadn't left Evangeline's side for 18 hours. Minor injuries, the doctors said. Bruises, cuts, shock. Nothing that wouldn't heal. But Kai-hoon stared at each mark like a personal failure. I tried to protect you by controlling you, he said finally, his voice raw in a way she'd never heard. I made you a target. I treated you like property instead of a person. I'm sorry. Evangeline looked at him, really looked, seeing the 12-year-old boy still bleeding alongside the powerful man. I let you because part of me wanted to be saved. I was so tired of fighting alone. She reached for his hand. We were both wrong, and we were both right. I needed protection. You needed purpose. We just did it badly. So what now? Now we redefine everything. 3 months later, Evangeline stood in front of her restaurant, hands trembling as she unlocked the door for opening night. The sign above read Tzita, Amharic for nostalgia, for bittersweet memory. Kai-hoon's investment had made it possible, but every menu item, every design choice, every decision was hers alone. Inside, Kai-hoon sat at a corner table, not the head table, not prominently displayed. Just another guest, though his presence still commanded attention. He'd insisted on it. This is your night, your space. I'm just honored to be here. Midway through service, Evangeline appeared at his table, flushed with success and joy, and extended her hand. Come meet my team. In the kitchen, she introduced him to her staff, immigrants like her, given opportunities she'd fought for. This is Kai-hoon, my partner. Not protector, not owner, partner. The word felt right. Their dynamic shifted into something neither had imagined possible. Kai-hoon handled threats, his organization now protecting vulnerable workers, shutting down operations that exploited women, using his power for something beyond profit. Evangeline handled life, her restaurant becoming a hub for immigrant advocacy, her voice amplified by Kai-hoon's connections, her strength inspiring others to demand respect. He taught her to fight, she taught him to feel, both were transformed. Late one night, after the last customer left, they stood alone in her kitchen. Evangeline turned to face him, and the words came without planning. I don't belong to you. Kai-hoon smiled, a real smile, rare and genuine. I know. But I choose you. His hand came up, cupping her face with the gentleness he'd learned from her. Every day, he said, his voice steady with certainty, I choose you too. Not possession, partnership, not claiming, choosing. Their hands intertwined, his tattooed fingers against her brown skin, equal pressure, equal commitment. Two people who'd collided accidentally and built something intentional. A mafia boss who'd learned that control wasn't the same as care. A server who discovered that accepting help didn't diminish her strength. Together, they'd built an empire based not on fear but on mutual respect. Protection offered freely, trust given willingly, love chosen daily. What would you do? Evangeline whispered, echoing the question that started everything. If someone asked you to risk everything? Kai-hoon pulled her closer, his answer simple and true. I'd do it again. For you, I'd do it all again. And in that moment, both were finally completely free. Thank you for listening till the end. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart. Where in the world are you turning in from? Let me know in the comments so we can connect and share our thoughts. I appreciate the time you spent here with me today.